Chapter 9. River Gud starts its 90-mile journey to the sea from somewhere up in the Gudian hills, where it tumbles down the sandstone rock into foaming rapids and pours from great heights, creating spectacular waterfalls. Gathering momentum, it snakes towards the city, meandering past the palace and a small port, before picking up speed again and gushing under the ancient 9-arch stone bridge. It continues its long journey south until eventually dispersing into the sea. The flow of water below the bridge was particularly treacherous, and its fearsome eddies could pull even the strongest swimmer under. Fishermen and boatmen avoided this part of the River Gud because its dangers and tragedies were well known. Diving in was a stupid thing to do. Splidge spun helplessly in the raging torrent, and the weight of his clothes dragged him down. He kicked frantically and thrashed his arms, but it was useless. He couldn't swim. He'd never taken a lesson in his life. The force of the current kept him afloat for a while and carried him at breakneck speed away from the bridge and away from any chance of rescue. He was tossed around like a rag doll, unable to reach the bank. And as he was flipped over for the 100th time, he caught sight of Mistress Doreen ahead of him, struggling in the river as much as he was. The water was cold, and Splidge felt his limbs going numb. He was sinking, and he choked as the river began to swallow him up. How long he was under, he had no idea, but the roar in his ears was deafening. He shot up, breaking the surface momentarily before being dragged back down again. A boulder became his saviour when he crashed into it, shooting him upwards and giving him a chance to suck in much-needed air. Jerking his head round, he looked for the girl and was immediately accosted by branches from an overhanging tree. He reached for them, but they snapped in his hand, showering him in a flurry of leaves. Fighting the current was exhausting, and Splidge weakened. He slipped below the surface once more, and this time he hadn't the energy to claw back. He dropped like a stone, and everything went black. Groggins was in the kitchen, preparing lunch. Every now and then he would spoil the Royal Gud and conjure up something special. To take the king's mind off the misery of recent events, Groggins concocted an exceptional menu. Roasted mushrooms, stuffed with fiery red chilies, served on a bed of egg noodles and smothered in celery sauce. He would follow this with lemon cheesecake sprinkled with strawberry flakes and covered in whipped cream. And then to finish, a couple of fudge biscuits and a pot of Guddamint tea. This should help King Guddamac snap out of the gloom that shrouded him since the fire. The Royal Gud was having a big sulk, and he refused to leave his chambers, or even get out of bed. He rarely showed his face from beneath the exquisitely embroidered silk eiderdown. He was unhappy, and he wanted everyone to know it. Food was his only solace, and all he would talk about. But official duties, royal appointments and paperwork were stacking up. Most importantly, the king needed to engage builders to repair and make good the throne room. The colour scheme needed to be chosen and fabrics selected for the upholstery. A Mr. Edison was desperate to see the supreme leader about his clever ideas for lighting the place. Candles were too dangerous, and he had invented something called an electric light bulb. With a simple flick of a switch, Mr. Edison claimed that the king could illuminate the palace in an instant, and there wouldn't be any need to employ boys to crawl along the rafters with sticks of wax and the naked flame. But Mr. Edison was sent away, unseen. The top man remained incommunicado. Groggins stacked his tray with the delicious-smelling meal and set off to the royal bedchamber. Unbeknown to the trusty servant, underneath a small three-legged stool in the corner of the kitchen, the orange crag had been waiting. its eyes on tenterhooks, watching out for scraps. Crags are scavengers, but they are fussy. They prefer fresh vegetables and cooked meat, so unless they're really desperate, rotting titbits remain uneaten. You cannot palm off any old rubbish on a crag. They wouldn't touch it with a cragpole, as the saying goes. As soon as Groggins left the kitchen, the crag zipped across the tiled floor and clambered up to the worktop. Its nose twitched impatiently while it sought out a midday snack. Groggins was always careful not to leave anything lying around. He'd wiped the surfaces, washed the cooking implements, and put away all the appetising ingredients. The fastidious old fool had made sure there wasn't a single remnant of food for a poor hungry crag to fill its belly with. Or at least, so he thought. Crags have excellent eyesight, and the pea-shaped morsel, discarded at the end of the worktop, didn't go unnoticed. The crag was on it in a flash. At first, the orange mock creature thought it was a small stone, because it was brown, hard, and didn't smell of anything. But the crag examined it further and decided it might be a pellet. Pellets were made of food that had been squashed together and allowed to dry, and some pellets were delicious. Crags could eat pellets all day. 2 crunches and the brown pellet disappeared down the hungry beast's throat. It had an odd taste, and was spicy too. It was hot. In fact, very hot. The pellet was burning the crag's tongue, and it felt as if the creature's whole mouth was aflame, like a raging fiery furnace. "A peppercorn!" it choked, desperately trying to spit out the chewed remnants from its stinging mouth. The creature's orange hair stood on end, and its eyes streamed profusely. The poor thing wanted to dash to the sink and drop into a bowl of water to stop the stinging. But the crag was paralysed. The pain transferred from its mouth to its stomach and grew worse by the second. Just then, Groggins returned to the kitchen, and when he spotted the little beast squatting on the worktop with its tongue hanging out, panting in a frenzy, the royal butler marched over, grabbed it by the scruff of the body — crags don't really have necks — and lobbed it out of the window. Kitchens were no place for wet, muddy crags. Its abrupt landing on the cold cobbles of the palace courtyard was enough to bring the stunned crag back to its senses, and it started to run. "Water!" it shrieked. "I must find water!" With its mouth still ablaze, the orange mock creature sped out of the palace gates, across the drawbridge, and headed towards the great east gate. It rushed through the ancient archway, and without any reservations, the crag dived off the 9-arch bridge and plunged straight into River Gud. The crag was carried along by the powerful current. It opened its mouth, allowing the cold water to slosh over its tongue, and soon the peppery sting started to ease. Crags are good swimmers, and being lightweight, they bounce along the surface of turbulent watercourses. The orange mock creature had no qualms about being in the river. It curled into a ball, tucking in its paws, and merrily skimmed along the surface with the intention of rolling onto the bank when the opportunity arose. Thump! The crag collided with something, and instinctively it dug in its claws and clung on. Was it hallucinating, or did the object it gripped resemble a boy's head? The crag looked closer, and was stunned, because it recognised the face. Splidge was unconscious. His body had been brought to the surface by the swirling waters, and although astonished at finding his friend in the river, the crag knew it had to get the boy out before he drowned. Where the river had widened, the current had also slowed, making it easier for the crag to nudge his master towards a shallow bank. The little mop creature wasn't strong enough to drag the limp boy's body completely out of the river, but it managed to wedge him in the mud so that he was unlikely to float away. It stared at the motionless Cragflinger, deciding what to do next. Was he breathing? The crag held a paw in front of Splidge's mouth and concluded he wasn't. Was the boy's heart beating? The crag felt for a pulse, but it couldn't find one. Was he dead? The crag kicked Splidge on the arm, expecting him to react, but he just lay there, lifeless. With a growing sense of despair, the orange mop creature leapt onto Splidge's chest and jumped up and down, trying to restart his heart. "Wake up!" it shouted in desperation. Harder and harder it thudded on the land's ribs, just above the sternum, but Splidge didn't respond. Eventually, the crag plopped onto the wet grass beside the inert boy, realising it had to face the truth. Splidge was dead. How could this have happened? What was Splidge doing in the river? The crag cursed itself for not doing enough to save its master. It woefully stared at the inanimate body. This was no place to die. The orange mop creature turned away, realising it would have to tell the king. But it didn't want to leave its friend lying there in the drizzle, exposed to the elements and the hungry crows. A violent gurgling made the crag jump. A cough followed, and the deceased boys spluttered and gasped for air. Splidge was alive. The crag jumped for joy, landing back on its master's chest. "Hey, stop that, will you?" croaked the Cragflinger, pushing the orange mop creature off. The boy elbowed himself up into a sitting position and belched loudly. "What happened?" "You died," said the crag. "But don't worry, I saved you." Splidge regarded the fuzzy thing with a quizzical look. It seemed such a preposterous idea, but slowly his memory returned. He had fallen in the river. No, not fallen, he dived in, and yes, he had nearly drowned. "You did save my life." The crag beamed. It was a hero. People would read about its heroics in the newspapers and pat it on the head and feed it warble nuts. "How do you feel?" it asked. "Pleased to be alive," the boy replied, feeling like he'd drunk half the river. "Good, then we can go back to the cowshed and have a nice cup of tea." The crag laughed and started to climb up the bank. "No, wait," Splidge shouted. "What about Mistress Doreen?" "What about her?" "She's still in the river." Splidge got to his feet. He felt giddy and his head thumped, but he rushed up the bank and hurried along the footpath. The crag watched, dumbfounded. Had the boy lost the plot? What on Gud was the girl with the raven hair doing in the river? Reluctantly, the crag followed. Splidge started to regain his strength and felt better. As he quickened his pace, he scanned the river looking for any sign of the beautiful girl. The crag had to gallop to catch his determined friend, and when it did, Splidge pulled the hairy beast up onto his shoulder and told it about the note, the visit to the hog and bucket, and how Mistress Doreen had been pushed off the bridge by the ugly henchman, Pigface. "Good riddance to her, I say," scoffed the crag. "She and her cronies wanted us to burn in the palace fire." "I'm not too sure about that," Splidge said. "She wanted to see me, to tell me something." "Tell you what?" "I don't know, but we must find her and rescue her from the river, if she's still alive. Come on." It wasn't possible to see the entire river in one go. There were many bends and curves, and the path occasionally left the bank and meandered across open fields before returning and running parallel again. It meant Splidge and his furry companion had to make sure they hadn't accidentally overtaken the girl. Splidge fretted about her, and he fervently hoped her body wasn't lying at the bottom of the hazardous river. Then he saw something that raised his hopes. A dark object bobbed up and down on the surface in the distance. Was it human, a dislodged branch, or a large fish floundering in the water? "There!" Splidge yelled, pointing madly. The crag followed his finger, focusing its eyes. The river had widened considerably and was now almost calm. Floating out in the middle was a mass of bedraggled hair, flipping from side to side. Mistress Doreen was not only alive, she was swimming. At first, the would-be rescuers thought she was making for the opposite bank, but they soon realised she was heading for another object in the water, a half-submerged rowing boat about 50 feet further downstream. Splidge frowned. The boat looked wrecked and unlikely to support her weight. He called out and waved his hands frantically, but the girl was too far away, so he walked along the bank, keeping pace with her. When she reached the small craft and hauled herself on board, Splidge could breathe again. But the wreck was dangerously low in the water, and Splidge half expected it to sink. The girl must have found a bucket or something, because she bailed water out for several minutes. The little craft appeared to be more stable after that, and Splidge rushed to the water's edge to call to Mistress Doreen again. But exhausted, she flopped backwards and disappeared out of sight. The river broadened into a huge lake. In the middle was a small island covered with scrub and a few trees, and not a lot else. Splidge hoped the little craft might nudge into the island, although they'd still have the problem of how to reach the girl. Unfortunately, the boat was caught by the current again and veered away. An old tree trunk covered in ivy floated close to the bank. If the tree trunk had been longer, Splidge could have balanced on it and reached out for the boat as it passed. If he had some rope and was able to somehow wake the girl, he could have thrown it to her and pulled the boat in. He felt useless and cursed himself. Why couldn't he think of a way to help the leather-clad girl? The boat drifted on. "Wait a tick," said Splidge. "There's something odd going beyond the island. I expected the river to snake off into the distance, but it doesn't do that. There's only the horizon. And what's that strange whooshing sound? Can't be the wind. There isn't any." He sprinted along the grassy path until it petered out into a bank of shingles with a few sharp rocks jutting through. Beyond that, the world disappeared. Splidge skidded to a halt. "Blimey, another 2 steps and I would have been a goner." "I've never seen anything like it," the crag said, watching the river disappear over an edge. "It's a waterfall. What an incredible sight! There must be hundreds of tons of water gushing down that precipice. Must be 1,000 feet or more." At the bottom, they saw a torrent of white, whirling foam, frothing up as the water thundered against giant boulders. "That accounts for the whooshing," said Splidge. "Oh, Gud, I've just realised. The boat will go over this, and Mistress Doreen with it. We've got to stop it." "How are we going to do that?" "I don't know. Wait a minute. An idea. It might work. Come on." "What?" Splidge gave the waterfall a final glance. "That's crazy. Hypnotic even. I feel a strong compulsion to jump off." The crag looked at the boy. "Don't be daft." "No, don't worry. I won't. Come on. We've got to rescue Mistress Doreen." They ran back along the pebbles towards the boat. "What's the plan?" puffed the crag. "You're going to what? Why didn't I think of it before? I'm a Cragflinger, aren't I? I'm going to fling you into the boat, and then you can wake up Mistress Doreen and get her to row back to shore." "Me?" said the crag. "I don't want to be thrown into a vessel that's going over a waterfall." "Stop fussing. You can always swim back if you have to." Splidge grabbed his mop-like friend, extracted its telescopic nose and swung it above his head, increasing the momentum. Once he had gauged the distance, Splidge gave the orange beast a mighty thrust and let go. As the crag glided through the air, it splayed its body and made adjustments to its trajectory with its outstretched paws. It was an expert after years of being flung at crag targets, and by lowering its nose at the last moment, it landed with a hefty bump slap bang in the centre of the rowing boat and onto the lap of the sleeping girl. Picking itself up, the orange mop creature poked its nose and then its face over the side of the doomed craft and manipulated its paw to give the thumbs-up signal. "Everything all right?" Splidge shouted across the water. Yes. Sort of." Splidge frowned. Sort of didn't sound good. "The girl is asleep and I can't wake her, and there's another small snag." "What's that?" "There are no oars." "Oh, gutter sticks," Splidge cursed. The floating wreck was picking up speed and drifting nearer to the waterfall. If only he could get onto the boat, then he could use his hands as paddles and steer it clear of the edge. The crag's paws were far too small. How he wished he had learnt to swim. "Is there any rope or anything?" Splidge called. The dinghy was decrepit and the hull had almost rotted away. It was a miracle it hadn't sunk. In the next few minutes there would be nothing left, just matchsticks. The Crag wasn't worried for itself. It knew it could bail out and swim back. But what about the girl? Without oars, the boat couldn't be rowed. Without rope, it couldn't be towed. And Mistress Doreen was too heavy and the current too strong for the Crag to swim behind the boat and push it back to shore. Time was running out. Standing on the bank, Splidge racked his brains. If only he had another boat. And then he remembered something. "Wait there!" Alarmed, the Crag watched Splidge dash back along the bank. The waterfall was drawing near, and very soon the Crag would have to abandon ship and leave Mistress Doreen to her terrible fate. His master had better be quick if he wanted to save the Baron's daughter. On the night of the feast, the leather-clad girl had appeared stern, remote and cold. But now, while she lay unconscious in the bottom of the dilapidated boat, she seemed fragile. The Crag couldn't see how they could possibly save her. It slapped its paw against her sleeping face once more. Why didn't she wake up? Splidge, meanwhile, slid down the muddy slope and waded into the water. He hurled himself onto the submerged, ivy-covered tree trunk that he had spotted earlier, but it spun round and tipped him headlong into the river. Instinctively, he grabbed at the ivy, and using it like rope, he pulled himself back up onto the log and cast his legs astride to remain stable. The runaway boat was really close to the edge now, and Splidge called urgently, "Crag! Crag! Swim to me, quickly!" The boy had a vague plan, and he coiled up the ivy in his hands, leaving one end bound to the trunk. Lying prone and scooping the water backwards, he paddled for all he was worth, propelling the log out into the main body of the river. The Crag, although reluctant to leave the girl, dived into the river and scudded across to its master. Splidge snatched the orange ball and hauled it out of the water. "No time to explain," he said, wrapping the ivy around the bedraggled body and tying a knot. Grabbing the mini-beast's nose and spinning the Crag around his head, he lobbed the creature back towards the abandoned craft, the ivy uncoiling behind it. Unfortunately for Splidge, the inertia of the throw rocked the trunk and he toppled back into the water. The slap across the face had slowly brought the raven-haired girl back to consciousness, and she sat up disorientated. Her memory was fuddled. Brute was chasing her through the cattle market. There was a tussle on the ancient nine-arch bridge. Then she was falling. Or was she swimming? No, she was drowning, and there was a boat. She had to get to the rowing boat. The craft began to shake. She grabbed the gunwales of the boat, every muscle taut with fear. The little craft was tilting. There was no time to jump. Water was whooshing over the top of the boat, and it was tipping up. She was going to fall. Then an orange blob plopped into her lap, an animal of some sort with two black button eyes. It flashed its razor-sharp teeth and dived at her, clamping its jaws on her belt. The boat slipped away. But strangely, she wasn't falling. She was teetering on the edge of the precipice. Water was surging into her face and pummeled her chest. She dangled helplessly. Back on the submerged tree, Splidge gripped the ivy tightly. But he knew the orange mock creature wouldn't be able to hold on to the girl for long. The weight of the bloated tree trunk acted like an anchor, but he still needed to haul the Crag and the girl back from the abyss before the makeshift rope snapped. The cold water brought Mistress Doreen to her senses, and she realised she was in great danger. Grasping the ivy rope, she heaved herself from the overhang, and then, inch by inch, she somehow managed to claw away from the brink. Splidge knew the strong current could easily carry the girl and the Crag back over the edge, so he paddled hard towards the nearest bank, towing them behind him. Still submerged and biting onto the raven-haired girl's belt, the Crag couldn't hold its breath any longer and let go. Fortunately, Mistress Doreen was far enough away from the waterfall to be able to swim towards the boy on his floating tree. Nearing the shore and shallow water, Splidge abandoned the tree trunk and, standing up, pulled the girl in. As soon as she was close enough, he hooked his arms around her waist and helped her safely onto the small beach. The crag scudded along the surface a second later, untangled itself from the ivy, and joined his friends in a collapsed heap. Fatigued by the misadventure, they laid still for a while, getting their breath back. The life-saving tree trunk had drifted calmly to the edge of the waterfall, and the three of them watched how, with disquieting ease, it toppled over and vanished from view. "Are you all right?" Splidge asked the bedraggled girl anxiously. Mistress Doreen swept the jumble of matted hair away from her face. "Yes, I think so," she said softly, and she smiled at the boy. "Thank you." "That was a close thing," Splidge said, gazing into her beautiful brown eyes.
"I didn't think we could make it,"
the crag said. The girl smiled. "The ivy was a stroke of genius." "It was the only thing I could think of," Splidge swallowed. "I'd never been so scared in my life." "You were scared," Mistress Doreen laughed. "Try dangling from a watery precipice sometime. I'd rather not if it's the same to you."
"Hey,"
blurted the crag, pointing across the river.
"Shouldn't we be over there?"
Splidge dragged his eyes away from the raven-haired girl and glanced over to where the crag jabbed its paw. "Eh? If that's the riverbank, then—"
"Yes, great work, Splidge," the orange mop creature sighed. "You've only landed us on the island."
"Oh, gutter sticks!" Splidge got to his feet and surveyed the beach. "That wasn't very clever, was it?"
"Never mind. We'll think of a way to get off, somehow. Come on," urged the crag. "Let's get out of the rain. We're soaking wet anyway, but some shelter would be nice."
"Yes, good idea. See if there's anywhere suitable, will you?" The crag grinned and trundled off while Splidge put his hand out to help the young lady to her feet. "Looks like you're stuck with me a while longer," Mistress Doreen said. There was an air of mischief in her voice. Splidge shifted awkwardly. That's all right with me, miss." Together they trudged up the muddy beach towards two large oak trees where the crag was waiting. The leafy branches created a protective canopy for the three of them to sit under while they viewed the expanse of water and opposite bank. "Oh, I'm such an idiot. We could be on our way home now, and in the dry," the boy moaned, absent-mindedly throwing a twig. "Don't beat yourself up," the Baron's daughter laughed. "You're my hero at the moment." Splidge melted. "It's my pleasure, Mistress Doreen." "Oh, please don't call me Mistress Doreen. That's how my vile father introduces me to his acquaintances. To my friends, I'm just plain Doreen." Splidge didn't think there was anything plain about the raven-haired beauty at all. "I'm Splidge, and this is my crag, but I suppose you know that already." "I do," she smiled, showing off her lovely white teeth, and Splidge grinned back at her, wishing his gnashers were equally as clean. He could still make out a faint hint of her distinctive perfume, and during the briefest respite from the rain, the sun crept out from behind the menacing clouds and reflected off the girl's wet leather, causing the raindrops to sparkle like diamonds. "We couldn't let you sail over the waterfall and drop to your death, even if you and your father's men did try to kill us." Doreen flashed a surprised look at the boy. "Why did you set fire to the palace?" Doreen looked away and toyed with her damp hair. "The thing is, I saw you," Splidge continued. "I guess I didn't drink enough of that drugged beer, so I witnessed the whole thing. If my friend Snotty hadn't come to my rescue, I would have been burned alive, and so would all the Cragflingers." "Yes, I know." Doreen shifted uneasily and stared at the ground. Splidge watched her closely. "I saw the men pour firewater over the furniture and set it alight. Your father was giving orders, and even you checked me out to make sure I was asleep. But I wasn't, was I? You can't deny that." Doreen turned back to the upset boy. "You have every right to hate me," she said, getting to her feet. The crag nudged Splidge and said, under its breath,
"I told you she was evil."
Splidge ignored the comment and also stood up.
"I don't hate you. I just don't know why you would do such a thing."
The girl with the raven hair bit her lip and turned round to face the boy who had just risked his life to save her. "You don't know my father. He's the evil one. I thought I knew him, but his behaviour that night really surprised me, really shocked me. He must have planned the fire. I mean, the men brought the containers of flammable liquid." "Yes, but it wasn't supposed to go that far." "Then you did know what he was doing." "Kind of. But the throne room was supposed to be empty. I screamed for my father to stop, but he wouldn't. He pushed me aside and ordered me to go and wait in the coach with that horrible shaven monster thing that he keeps in the cage. I had to obey him." Doreen paused for a moment before continuing. Splidge could see that she was struggling. "Yes, I did know they were going to set fire to the palace, but only the throne room. No one was supposed to get hurt. But there was no stopping my father. He didn't seem to care if he killed someone." The girl put her head in her hands. "I waited in the coach. It was unbearable knowing what he was doing and that you and the other Cragflingers were up there, unconscious. I know it was cowardly, but I panicked. And I ran away." Tears streamed down her face. With reddened eyes, Doreen glanced briefly at Splidge and then cast her head down in shame. Splidge wrestled with his thoughts. He remembered seeing Doreen holding the cage in the throne room, but he hadn't actually seen her pour any of the flammable liquid.
"Where did you go?"
asked the crag. Doreen wiped her eyes. "I don't know. I just ran. I knew my father would be livid that I'd gone, and that I would be severely punished if he found me. He's an aggressive man, a ruthless businessman. But I'd never seen that side of him before. I got frightened. I ended up at Defoe's coffee emporium and begged Mr. Defoe to let me stay in one of his rooms. He wasn't happy about it, but he said I could stay a couple of nights. I was scared and confused, as if I'd been drugged."
"Drugged? You mean like the stuff the Baron put in the beer at the feast?"
the crag asked. Doreen looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "The rat poison, or whatever it was your father slipped into Tubby's ale," explained Splidge. "It was really powerful and made us all drowsy and incapable." "My father didn't spike the beer." Splidge scoffed.
"He must have done. It knocked us all out good and proper."
"No, my father didn't have access to the beer. He was annoyed when he discovered the landlord from the Hog and Bucket had brewed it. Tubby's ale was far too strong. That's what knocked you out. Being a brewer's daughter does teach you something. If you'd been drinking Baron's bitter, as my father assumed you were, you would easily have got out of the throne room as he planned." Splidge folded his arms while he tried to fathom it all out. "So why did he want to burn the palace down in the first place?" "He didn't. Well, not the whole palace, just the throne room. He wanted to damage it so the king would have to sell him land to raise the funds to get it repaired." "Land? What does the Baron want land for?" "I don't know. My father has something up his sleeve, but he doesn't share much with me. I just help him run the brewery." "But surely the king wouldn't sell the land to the man who burnt down his throne room, would he? I mean, I know the king's a bit dotty, but he's not completely stupid." "The fire was supposed to look like an accident." Doreen moved closer to Splidge and took his hand in hers. "I know it's confusing, and I appear to be a villain, but really I'm not. Can you forgive me?" Splidge stared into her big, brown, dreamy eyes. "Well—" He frowned. "Hang on. What about the note? What was that all about?" "What note?" "The note you slipped under my door." "I didn't slip a note under your door." Splidge ran his hand through his knotted hair. "Sure you did. Look, I've got proof. The parchment is still here. Somewhere." He pulled out the sodden paper mush from his pocket and presented it to Doreen. "What is it?" she asked. "It's got messed up now, but you put it under my door, didn't you?" "No." "But it was signed MD. It said you wanted to see me at once." Doreen shivered. It was getting chilly. The temperature had dropped a few degrees, and standing under the tree didn't shelter them from the wind. "I'm sorry, Splidge. I don't know anything about a note." Splidge sighed. The weather was getting worse and they needed to find a way of escaping the island before they all froze to death. An almighty clap of thunder made them jump. A storm was brewing. It was not unexpected. Rain, thunder and lightning were regular occurrence in Gud. More rumbling was followed by a flash of lightning zigzagging across the leaden sky. "We've got to get off this island and find shelter," said Splidge.
"How are we going to do that?"
asked the Crag. "We need to have a scout round and see if we can find something else to float on. It's probably best if we split up. I don't think we can get lost." They each nodded silently and set off in search of tree trunks or anything that might float and take their weight. The rain pelted down, and the howling wind gathered momentum while Splidge rummaged through a thicket of thorny bushes. The towering trees swayed dangerously overhead. Was it such a good idea to launch themselves back into the river? Perhaps it would be safer to build a camp and sit out the storm.
"Splidge! Splidge, I've found something!"
Pushing his way through the brambles, Splidge hurried back towards the river's edge to where the squeaky voice came from. By the time Splidge found the Crag, Doreen was already there, and they were sitting studying something, bobbing in the water.
"What do you think?"
the Crag asked, sitting on a stone. Splidge looked at the half-submerged beer barrel with the words "Tubby's Special Brew" stencilled on the side. "How did that get there?" Splidge asked. "My father probably made Tubby dump his ale in the river, or did it for him," Doreen answered. "If we could reach the barrel, we'd be able to make a raft. Shame there aren't any more," Splidge said. "Over there, look." Doreen pointed to another barrel bobbing along just below the surface. "We'll never reach that one either," Splidge said. "There are more over there too." "Poor Tubby." "What do you mean?" "Put it this way, I wouldn't like to have been in Tubby's shoes when my father discovered he was brewing his own beer. I hate to think what he does when he gets angry, given that he was prepared to murder a room full of Cragflingers when they got in his way," Splidge said. A branch crashed to the ground, and the boy shouted above the wind's deafening roar, "The storm's getting worse! Forget the barrels! We need to take cover!" Groggins was distressed. The king was missing for the second time. The royal butler had worked at the palace for most of his life, and to his knowledge this had never happened before. He'd searched high and low and still drawn a blank. The royal Gud had been absent without leave for the whole day. Groggins considered calling the Gud Street Runners, a sort of police force for missing people. If somebody disappeared, the Gud Street Runners, about 13 of them, would sprint off in all directions. They blew trumpets, dished out handbills, and sang the name of the missing person until they were found. To engage them to find the king, however, would rattle the general public. It would be bad form to admit you have lost the king, especially given the size of the man. Groggins couldn't even enlist the help of the Royal Cragflinger because he too had disappeared. What was the matter with the world? Was everyone taking the day off? It was getting late and a storm was blowing in. Everything needed to be locked up, windows closed, shutters bolted and hatches battened down. It was getting late and a storm was blowing in. Everything needed to be locked up, windows closed, shutters bolted and hatches battened down. Groggins consulted with Perch at the gatehouse.
"I say, raise the drawbridge," Perch argued.
"What, and leave the king on the outside?"
Groggins shook his head.
"But you know what a stickler he is for routine. He won't like any irregularity. He expects the drawbridge to be shut tight at 9 bells, and it's nearly 15 past now."
Groggins had heard the quarter toll and figured the king must know the time.
"Oh, very well. Haul it up."
Perch patted Groggins on the cheek.
"I think it's for the best. I'll sleep easy, knowing I've done my duty."
The ruddy-faced gatekeeper disappeared into the stone building to start the mechanism.
"Wait a minute!"
A huge figure, dressed in black, with a wide-brimmed hat, emerged from the darkness on the opposite bank. He gesticulated furiously, calling,
"Let me across, man! Let me cross!"
Groggins hammered on the gatehouse door and instructed Perch to reverse the winches and let the drawbridge back down. As the man in black lumbered over to the palace side, The royal butler gaped at him. The disguise wasn't fooling anyone. The king had returned, and in his hand was a sack with a picture of a yellow fish on the side.
"Your Royal Guddiness,"
Groggins stammered, pointing to the bag.
"Is that the big kipper?"
The king nodded vigorously.
"That's right, Groggins. I've been to the fun fair."
Perch emerged from his control room, his mouth wide open.
Raise it, Perch,"
boomed the king as he stepped off the platform.
"Come with me, Groggins."
As the drawbridge thundered upright, the king stomped across the courtyard to the palace entrance. He opened the grand double doors and stepped into the main hall, where he dropped the heavy bag on the floor. Discarding the wide-brimmed hat at the same time, the big man collapsed onto the marble tiles.
"You may be wondering about my unusual attire. I didn't want anyone to recognise me. I've been away on clandestine business." "At the fun fair?"
replied Groggins, shutting the door and attending to the locks.
"Indeed so. I've sold the rotten thing."
Groggins rolled his eyes.
"Sold the fun fair?"
The words plopped out of his mouth.
"Oh, don't sound so surprised. It was a white elephant. It only opens once a month. The rides are dangerous, and the man who operates it is a fool, and it's completely run down. It was costing me a fortune."
The king tipped the contents of the bag onto the floor. Hundreds of silver coins spilled out.
"Light some candles, will you, Groggins?"
Groggins lit a candelabra, and a warm glow brightened up the room, while the king sat like a child in a sandpit, running his hands through the pile of coins.
"Groggins, get closer. See how it glistens?"
It took the royal butler a few moments to get down on his knees.
"How much is here, do you think?"
asked the king, toying with his newfound riches.
"I haven't seen so much money in all my life."
Groggins stared at the heap of coins.
300 gudders,
chimed the king triumphantly.
"I asked for more, but Giles wouldn't agree. Still, this shall do." "Are you telling me that you sold the fun fair to Baron Frogmorton?"
Dumbfounded, Groggins stared at the king.
"Yes, I did. But why?"
The king sighed.
"I had no choice, Groggins. The fire was the last straw. We need to get the palace in tip-top condition for the royal tournament. My brother wanted the land and I needed the money. It was as simple as that."
The king picked up the sack and started to refill it with his prized silver gudders.
"With the tournament, Groggins, we have a chance to regain our position as a great nation. If we can be triumphant at the games, then we can lift our heads high again. It is essential that the boy Splidge does us proud. How is the lad coming along?"
Groggins tapped his chin.
"Is there something I should know, Groggins?"
The king's manservant creaked to his feet.
"I'm sorry to report that the Royal Cragflinger and his little companion have gone missing."